ladies and gentlemen, dear participants. Europa Forum Lucerne, Green Business Switzerland and EY are welcoming you today to this session on sustainability. Sustainability is all around us, all over us. As a topic, it's maybe one of the most important and urgent issues that we need to address together and globally. But it also comes as an opportunity. So we would like to discuss today in a panel how sustainability can protect and even create new value for our people, our planet, and our prosperity. The aim of today's panel is to create awareness for the topic and also to inspire you. To do this, we have three distinguished speakers with us today. We have André Hoffmann, Vice Chair at Roche and philanthropist. We also have André Frey, partner at Partners Group and chairman of Sustainability, and Julie Lynn Teagland, managing partner at EY for Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. My name is Benjamin Teufel, and I will be moderating today's session. And with that, I think we're all set to get started. You will now hear three introductory notes from all of our panelists, and we will start with André Hoffmann giving a broad overview and setting the scene on the topic. Then we will hear André Frey giving us a little insights on the relevance of sustainability from an investor point of view. And then we will hear from Julie Teagland some of the impressions that she got at COP26 in Glasgow. And with that, please, André Hoffmann, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. Thank you very much for giving me the right to be the first to talk. First, I would like to apologize for not being with you in presence, not being with you physically. I have sadly succumbed to the dreaded virus. I was infected 11 days ago by the Corona 23, and I've developed a little bout of COVID, which forced me to stay at home and sort of look after myself. The reason I emphasize this is not just in order to elicit sympathy from the listeners, but also because I think it's an important demonstration to the weakness, the inherent weakness in humanity. The Corona crisis, the pandemic, was a danger that a lot of people knew about before it actually crystallized. For the past 2 years, we've been trying to protect ourselves. I myself have been, twice vaccinated. I'm wearing masks. I'm sticking to protocols in the office and in public life in general, and it still got me. And so I think there's a lesson there, which I hope we can use also when we talk about sustainability, about sustainability in the broader sense. It's not just an environmental phenomenon. I think it's about risk management, and risk management is one of the things that we in business have to take very seriously. And I hope to be able to come back to this after that. So let me first allow by making a couple of, after this apologies, let me a couple of personal remarks. I was born in 1958. At the time, there were just short of 3 billion people living on the planet. Now, a bit more than 63 years later, we are more than 8 billion. In the meantime, we also lost, according to WWF, since 1960, 67% of our species of vertebrates on the planet. So I'll repeat this because it's worth understanding. 67% of known species of vertebrates on the globe have disappeared in the last 60 years. Now, disappearance is for good, Once a species is gone, it will not come back. So I think it's important to keep this to our mind. Now, not all of this is negative, of course. The 7 billion people we just mentioned are all in better health, are all wealthier, are all stabler than they were ever since the beginning of humanity. Since we know humanity on the planet, most of the fight for humanity has been survival against very rough conditions, diseases, hunger, cold, protection of. So we are, as humanity, better off than we've been for a long time. And I think that's the best expression of this, the best crystallization of this is what we used to call the Sustainability Development Goals. Sorry, I'll come to that later. Sorry, I meant the Millennium Goals, which was the set of goals that the United Nations set for the Agenda 2005, which was supposed to guide humanity into the road for prosperity forward. And in general, these goals were very successful. They're fixed goals for instance, poverty reduction, which worked fantastically well. I mean, in that period, just in the run up to the year 2000, to the 21st century, we've actually succeeded in raising nearly 800 million people out of poverty. The death rates diminished, survival of firstborn increased. We had a real improvement into humanity's condition during that period. But at what cost? Rapidly after that, we started realizing that the corollary damage of this value creation were quite obvious for all to see. The pollution, I mean, presence of plastic all over our system, the eutrophication of most of our rivers and estuaries due to an increase in fertilizer rates, which is bigger than what the planet can carry, the loss of species we referred to before, of course, the climate issue, the adverse climate events. I mean, we've had this year more floods and more hurricanes and more fires than we've ever had before. So I think it became quite obvious for a number of people that the current system of creating the value, the prosperity we all aspire to, came at a too high price. There again, the United Nations stepped in and invented a new way of looking at this particular phenomenon. And in negotiation under the chairmanship of Ban Ki-moon and in relationship with the businesses from all over the planet, we came up with a new notion called the Sustainability Development Goal. In other words, a roadmap to prosperity, which would also look at sustainability, at impact of the value creation mechanism on humanity and on the planet itself. So what does it mean at company level? At company level, it means that we needed to go a little bit deeper into how we created the value we just referred to before. We have, for instance, this notion of how can we create something that will create value in the long term rather than creating value in the short term. Here, maybe you will allow me a simplification. I think the key consideration of management, and in particular of management in big corporation, are two aspects. One is asset allocation. How do we invest with the means we have in order to create the wealth we aspire to? And the second one is risk management. How do we de-risk our activities? And as I said in introduction, the risk of a pandemic, which was well known, had been neglected until it actually hit us. So knowing this and knowing that the systems that we have built as humanity is not as resilient as it could be, how are we going to be able to construct a system which will allow us to minimize that risk? Now, the reason we are in such a risk surrounding, in such a risk environment, is because we have used as a decision tool until now, a very simple decision tool, short-term profit maximization. Milton Friedman, Nobel Prize winner in 97, the school of, no, in 78, sorry, the school of economists of Chicago, the business of business is business. So we take what is available, we make money out of it. In other words, we convert nature to cash. And once we have this cash, we pay it back to society through taxes, through salaries, through livelihoods in the broader sense. And it's for societies to deal with the so-called externalities. I would like to posit, and this would be the content of my keynote speech, I would like to posit that this is absurd. I think humanity would be better served by a value creation system which will deal with the consequences of its activity while it's doing it. What I'm trying to say is it's not how you spend the money that matters, it's how you make it. At some stage, we need to create value which is sustainable in the long term. Now, I would like to also hit something on the head. This is not about nature only. This is not about the impact of humanity on the planet and on the nature. It's also the maximum and best use of our free capitals. The capital, the social capital, how do we interact together? And also the human capital, how do we use talent, individual talents? The natural capital, of course, as well. But then we also need to make sure that we understand the interrelation, and I would even say the interdependencies between these different capitals before we come to the produced capital, which is the one we measure today. And that produced capital, this financial accounting, is just a very, very, very narrow platform, which does not capture the totality of what's happening around us. You know, I think it was Robert Kennedy who already in 1968 gave a speech saying that the GDP measures everything that is not important to humans. It measures all sorts of, it measures the bombs, it measures the rockets, but it doesn't measure the education of the children, it doesn't measure the love our family brought to us. And that sort of consideration is something that we have made very little progress on. And for me, the focus, and we are going to talk more about that during the rest of the day, the focus on climate change, the focus on the COP26 in Glasgow, the 27th version of the Kyoto Protocol, where we are trying to sort of diminish the impact that humanity is having on climate. This is, again, it's a too narrow platform. CO2 emission is not something, you know, it's not sufficient. It's important. We need to have to manage that. But what's important more, first and foremost, is the fact that we have an impact on the planet, and that impact is not only limited to climate, it's not limited to nature, it's also what includes us humans and how we work together. Now, for corporations, there's always this element which resurfaces every single time I have the opportunity to discuss this sort of issue, either within our company, Roche, or in other businesses. You know, we can't afford it. Transactional costs are increased by thinking long-term, and therefore humanity expects us to not respect those because we need to move quickly. And I think that is changing. And that is changing not only because we are getting more and more reasonable, but also because societal's thrust is pushing in that direction. Today, if you run a big corporation, you have to contend with a number of opinion bodies. I mean, if you look at, for instance, your employees in general would like to come and work for a company which has a purpose, for a company that is trying to make a positive impact, for a company that is trying to go the extra mile for the humanity, and not only booking a profit, but also being able to go a little bit further. Your customers equally are telling you, you know, we don't want just the cheapest possible thing. We want something that has a measurable impact on society, which does not bring too much negative externalities. The regulators, the banks are no longer lending, for instance, to fossil fuels company unless they get a premium. So it's getting more and more difficult to run your business. So if you have your customer, if you have your employees, if you have the regulator and the banks around you telling you you have to change, especially if you add to this the youth, you know, everybody under 20 is marching in the streets, breaking everything that moves in order to tell us we need to change our model. If you bring all these things together, I think you really have to change if you want to have a sustainable business model. If you really want to make sure that you exist as a company in the future, you're going to have to compose with all these dimensions. And I think that's a particularly important issue. So I have this vision going forward, and I was greatly encouraged in Glasgow by the fact that so many people are taking this to heart. I was greatly encouraged by the fact that we have now seen the birth of something called the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standard Board, which is an amalgamation of a number of different organizations, including the well-known in Europe IFRS, but also the TCFD and all sorts of acronyms, all sorts of vegetable soup of acronyms, pasta soups. And all these things together are going to try to go towards helping businesses to do something absolutely crucial, helping businesses to manage their impact. At the moment, we manage for profit, and in looking forward, we should be able to measure the impact our actions at corporate level, but also at societal level, are having on the systems, the impact we're having on the social, on the human, and on the natural systems, and how can we manage this impact in a way where we can get maximum result with minimum consequences. And the creation of the ISSB is the first time I see something practical, which could lead within a foreseeable future, I mean, let's say a year or 2 years, to the publication every year of not just a profit and loss statement, but also an environmental profit and loss statement, which will report on what's environment, on what's social, and what's human for companies. Because as long as we continue to construct our society, all the world around us, based only on this short-term profit maximization, we are going into a war. It is not going to be possible to create the wealth that we all need if we only concentrate onto the short term. So we need to better understand what we, society, owe to each other. How do we go towards the future? How do we continue to evolve into a net positive for society as a whole? That, my friends, is a very heavy lift. What we really need to do is to define a new social contract. What do we owe to each other? What can we do for each other? And that means we need to go out of the linear growth model that we had immediately after the Second World War. As I said before, when we created this wealth, which allowed 800 million people to come out of poverty in the last 40 years. And we will need to find a way of creating long-term value. And we can only do that if we change our relationship to each other as well as to the planet. So a big, heavy dose of humility will be needed. And despite the excitement I bring back from Glasgow, I think we still have an awful lot to do. Voilà, Benjamin, if I may, I will leave it at that. And I'm looking forward to our very exciting panel. And again, sorry not to be there. As you can see, I'm still not completely recovered. And if you see my eyes, they shine a little bit. It's because I'm excited, but also because I have a bit of fear. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, dear Andre. It's always inspiring and interesting to listen to your perspectives. And I look forward to the panel discussion right after. So I am Andre Frey, Chairman of Sustainability of Partners Group, and also just a human being. Probably I'm going to talk as Chairman of Sustainability, and maybe every now and then I'll share my personal comments like Andre did as well. Partners Group is a leading global private markets company, an investment firm. We have more than $100 billion of assets under management. We invest in private equity and debt. This means companies, but we also invest in real assets, meaning infrastructure and real estate. Partners Group is a company with about 1,500 employees, but another way to look at Partners Group is by actually looking at 200,000 to 300,000 employees that we oversee, that we steward in the underlying portfolio. Sustainability is, of course, a hugely important topic for the entire financial industry, and it's an important topic, even more important topic for the private markets industry, because we do majority own a number of companies, and we can really influence what happens in these companies. Now, if you look at our industry, the private markets industry is soon going to be $10 trillion in assets under management. A part of the assets to be deployed will go in the direction of Sustainable Development Goals. There will be a link to the SDGs. But actually, for much of the investments that we're going to do, there will not be a link to the Sustainable Development Goals. And the $10 trillion industry had to reinvent itself. We grew from just a trillion or two. We're now at 7 trillion, soon 10 trillion. We had to reinvent our industry. If you look back at the 80s or 90s, private markets was about financial engineering. That is value creation step 1.0. Then we have moved to creating value. We realized as an industry, it's not about holding assets, but it's really about building better companies as a majority owner. For the last decade plus, our industry has heavily focused on technology, which is not only like a disruptive element, but often allows us to create value in these companies and improve them, transform them. And I've heard people describe sustainability as value creation 4.0. And I believe that's true. Like technology has come and will never go away, sustainability is coming and will never go away. And that is why it's important to talk about this topic today. Actually, I had an interesting discussion with a chairwoman of one of our portfolio companies, and I was so excited about sustainability and value creation. And then she asked me, "But Andre, for whom do you create value? Is it prosperity? Is it the investors on whose behalf we invest? Or is it the employees and the families and the communities in our portfolio companies? Or is it actually the environment that we want to positively contribute towards?" And that is such a relevant question, completely in line with what Andre just described. Because sustainability is about prosperity and planet and people, or in the financial terms, it's about environmental and social and governance. Now, there's been quite a discussion in our industry what fiduciary duty is, and whether fiduciary duty is still to be seen in isolation just for the beneficiary. And I believe by now there's a broad consensus and agreement that it's actually a must-have to take a broader and a more holistic perspective. We cannot look at just the one beneficiary on whose behalf we invest. We must also look at the employees and the environment when we do invest that capital. And I would claim that private markets is actually perfectly suited to change things for the better, because we do own companies on a majority basis, and we have a mandate to invest in these assets for the long term. Often we buy companies and we will only sell them 5 or 10 years later. And that has a dramatic impact on the way how Partners Group, for example, looks at sustainability. Because if we have analyzed the company in 2020 and 21, if we then invest in 22, actually only sell it in 2030, this business still needs to make sense for the person or the company buying it in 2030 and holding it until 35 or 40. And that is why sustainability is not a short-term topic, it's a super long-term topic. It's about balancing short-term profitability with long-term value creation. And that is a really exciting perspective that I'm happy to represent and contribute to at Partners Group. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Julie Taegland. I lead EY across Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa, and it is a true honor to be with you. I have to say the excitement and enthusiasm of both Andre Huffman and Andre Frey were incredibly inspiring. Incredibly inspiring because I believe actually in what they said. I was asked to come and share the reflections of COP26 with you. And before I do that, I'd like to preface it with a comment that says, I believe that we are currently undergoing a paradigm shift. And Andre Huffman highlighted this, a shift from shareholder capitalism towards stakeholder capitalism. At EY, I run a survey every year that surveys about 1,500 CEOs across Europe, Middle East, India, and Africa. Overwhelming 85% of them felt that their role had changed. Their role was not only to generate short-term profit, but to find a way to tackle the most complex problems we have in the world. I can't think of anyone larger than what we face in the planet and sustainability. And I saw that, in fact, at COP26. I would reflect that over 197 countries with over 39,000 people were present in Glasgow and part of those negotiations. Countries came together that were effectively at war with each other, but they came to the table because the issue was more important than just a mere boundary, more important than just a religious dispute. It involved our future in all aspects. But it wasn't just the countries that came to the table and the tough negotiations. It was the fact that for the first time at this COP26, business and financial institutions were there en masse. They were present, they were engaged, and they feel like they have to do more than just drive short-termism. Business is at the table, and they are ready to take action. But to do so, they need a few prerequisites in terms of not just reporting standards that are consistent to measure progress, but also reliable regulatory environments that allow them to make difficult capital allocations with security for the future. COP26 didn't disappoint, in my view. There were strong agreements reached, for example, on the deforestation, with 19.2 billion in funds being put behind that. For example, on the 30% reduction in methane, which is a great outcome. The reduction in coal that was significantly addressed with India. But probably, if I was going to reflect, the biggest actually related to the commitment of Boris Johnson to have every single financial institution and listed company in the UK prepare a transition plan by the end of 2023, which would be disclosed. That, combined with the new International Sustainability Standards Boards, will bring true action. There's a common phrase in business: what we can't measure doesn't get done. And by offering standards on which we can measure progress, by asking businesses to step forward and make commitments, we not only make true on that paradigm shift, we also ensure that we're holding each other accountable for more than just an annual historical profit, but real contributions in terms of value-driven metrics that impact people, the planet, and our wider prosperity in terms of society. I thought COP26 was incredibly inspiring. And at each speech that I held, I encouraged that we come with the positive outcome. A positive outcome because not only it's important for the planet, but it's important to inspire the nearly 7.8 billion that weren't at that table in Glasgow, that couldn't feel that infectious excitement, but that we need to take with us on this journey. With us on this journey by encouraging them to make good and conscious choices, purposeful choices. I'm excited about the future and believe that too much talk is out there today, both in COP26 and beyond, about regulation, about reporting, and we need to focus also and equally on the business opportunity. The Industrial Revolution, ladies and gentlemen, took us approximately 80 years to complete. It was driven by innovation. The revolution that we will now embark on together will be driven partially by innovation, partially by regulation, and partially by necessity. I submit we don't have 80 years to do this, and COP26 showed that if we all pull together 197 governing bodies, 39,000 people, but probably more importantly, the 7.8 billion that didn't attend, to make a real difference for the planet and for our future. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today, and I'm honored to be in the company of such inspiring leaders. Thank you.
Thank you very much for all of you and your keynote speeches. Before we now go into our Q&A panel discussion, I would like to say a few words to our participants online. You have the chance, because after this panel discussion, we will be asking questions to some of the panelists. So you have the chance to ask and to raise your question within the little window that you see aside of the platform that you're currently logged into. You can already raise those questions right now. We will collect them and at the very end make a selection of some of them and then ask them to our panelists. Thanks a lot, and with that, let's step into our panel discussion. And I think the first question I would like to raise to you, Andre Hoffmann. Always have to go with a family name that we don't get confused today. Andre Hoffmann, sustainability is becoming more and more important, and a lot of countries and also companies set themselves targets to become climate neutral. Most of them only mean to become carbon neutral, in fact. What do you think is the motivation behind the majority of the companies today to commit to such targets?
Sorry, I was muted. Well, first of all, thank you very much to underline the fact that there are two Andre on this panel. Obviously, Andre is a winning force, and I think that's important to say. Thank you very much. Secondly, yeah, I was trying to sort of make it clear in my opening remarks that we are not really talking just about one metric which we are going to have to hit, and then the world will change. The CO2 emission is an interesting proxy because it gives us a good idea of the impact that our businesses can have on the environment. But of course, the reason why we emit CO2 is much wider than just the production of energy. So we need to make sure that we look at this as a sort of a guiding light. How can we? Because by reducing CO2, we are touching to a lot of the functioning systems of the company, and that will allow us in the long term to be better at what we're trying to achieve. It would be a mistake to believe that if you hit the CO2 metric, you are out of trouble, because that's not the way, sadly, these things work. And again, that's one of the things that we've learned in Glasgow. People were not talking about CO2 emission only anymore. They were really talking about nature, and in particular about the impact that our business activity are having on nature. Now, I come at this with a nature background. I was vice chair of WWF International for 25 years. I've really started my activity as a philanthropist to try to protect nature. And so I came into this conversation with the viewpoint that we need to save nature first and foremost. But I'm afraid that that's no longer appropriate. What we really are talking about is sustainability. Sustainability is, the long-term vision. I mean, it's so obvious that I feel embarrassed to say it, but there is no future if there is no sustainability. The world stops tomorrow if it's not sustainable. And so we need to look at this not only in terms of natural resources, but also, and I repeat myself, in terms of social and human capital. And as humanity, we will never be able to do something about CO2 emissions if we do not solve our inherent problems. It's not a coincidence that Black Lives Matter suddenly became so important in the US during the pandemic. This is a fault in our system, which gets exacerbated by the front winds as we are living during the pandemic. So we need to really get our house in order if we want to have an impact on CO2. And to reply to your question, focusing on CO2 emission is a way of reversing all this into the business. And we spoke about stakeholder before. This is what it's all about. It's how can companies be positive for stakeholders and not just for shareholders.
And I think, Andre Frey, Julie, you would agree to what Andre Hoffmann just said, right?
Well, I do. It's a new dimension that has come to the financial industry also, right? So Partners Group talks to clients, and by now every client starts a conversation by also bringing in ESG aspects. So there's no longer a one-dimensional view what like investment managers need to do. Now, admittedly, Andre, and that is the challenge we have. The first and foremost mandate for Partners Group is to generate financial returns. That's our fiduciary duty. But it's not to be seen in isolation. So we need to also educate our clients how we can broaden the mandates and how we do broaden the mandate. Now, admittedly, in our industry at this point, there's a lot of focus on CO2. Right, so the most tangible examples how you're serious about the planet and the environment is by referring to carbon reduction measures. And I believe that's okay. I mean, that's not where it's gonna stop, but I believe it's a good starting point. And clients like these examples. They wanna learn and really get the reaffirmation that an excited chairman of sustainability at Partners Group does not lower the returns, but create more sustainable returns for our investors in the long term.
I would argue that the two major engines that sort of determines the interaction we have among humans is greed and fear. And since the pandemic, fear is much more in the driving seat. And I think that when I say fear, I don't mean panic. No, I mean sort of respect of what resilience actually means and how you can manage long-term risk. So yes, the transaction cost is higher if you are looking at something else than the short term. but the risk insulation, the risk management, the de-risking of the transaction has taken, at least in my dealings, a much bigger proportion. And I think that is the way you can expect to dispatch your fiduciary duty in the most efficient manner, because you are going to have to take into account the nature risk. The nature risk is there. It's absolutely well documented. I mean, ICC, we can look at statistics one after the others. So running a business now just for short-term profit maximization without taking into account the survival risk is, I think, also not doing your fiduciary job properly.
I would strongly agree with that, even though my name is not Andre. I dare to agree, and would say I really think it's important that we move not just for sustainability metrics, and I understand the push around carbon, but moving more towards the value-driven metrics and having corporations and businesses that we both advise really focus on what value are they giving back to society in terms of long-term, and defining that along the lines of what they're doing for their customers, for their people, and wider society. And that's actually quite an easy formula that you can start to measure. Once we start to get that framework, then we can fine-tune it. I completely agree that right now carbon is the one that's front and center in everybody's mind, and that is forcing a change of the business models. But if we can pivot a little bit towards the value-based metrics, it'll give us a framework for which we can measure further, going a little bit beyond carbon and forcing us, I say forcing, motivating us to take a longer-term view than just that short-term capitalism. It's a change journey, though.
It is, yeah.
I just think we're going to have to go faster than we've been going in the past.
So we're hearing it's really about having a long-term view, and that in the long run and long term, you can actually create value if you transform as a company. Now the question is maybe to you, Julie, what happens to a company that doesn't want to transform and just won't transform at all?
I don't think it's going to be very long, Benjamin, to be really honest. I think there's companies right now that are transforming in order to get that edge. They're transforming to win. And you see that already. I don't want to mention any names, but take some of the big automotives that I've already said they've committed to getting out of the carbon engine. Take some of the big energy companies that are actually moving very much their business model towards sustainability. They are transforming to win because they see their old model dying. You see others transforming to help others, getting on board. Partners Group is one, financial institutions and banks, realigning professional services, transforming to help others really transform, and helping them along that journey, making sure they understand the risks and rewards, guiding them on the way to how to do that value creation. And that's where I see the benefit, for example, of Partners Group. You guys do value creation in the original context. And then the ones that aren't willing to transform, Benjamin, I think that's a question of time. We could start to put the timeline out there as to how long it's going to be. If you think about my comments around COP26 and those not in the room, the more purposeful, the 7 to 8 billion people are in making their decisions as a consumer, as an employee, as a bank, as a financial institution, and as a government, the more purposeful they do that, the more directive they are towards long-term value, the more there will be no option but to change, and to change with. And we saw that. I referred earlier in my comments to what happens in the Industrial Revolution. When you look at that, look at the amount of corporate and business death. You could look at that statistic, but you would be much more impressed about the statistic of corporate beginnings, rejuvenation, and startup that happened at that time because they were forced to change. And so I don't view it as a negative. It's more, it will be, and Andre will, I understand the pun, a force of nature that they're going to have to move.
Mm-hmm. Andre Frey, ESG is one of the criteria that you could apply. There are a couple of rankings also around. Now, from your financial perspective, is ESG just another additional criteria that is around when you look at in which companies you want to invest, or is that developing into something that maybe in the end, sooner or later, will be the most relevant, the most important criteria where you will base your investment decisions upon?
Well, I believe ESG in our company is part of the value creation initiatives. It's really important for us that we do not isolate the topic, but that we embed it into the organization. So as a matter of fact, like the ESG team designs the process, and then all investment professionals need to play by the rules. During the due diligence process, when you analyze a company, it's like seat belts, it's risk management, it's about avoiding heavy ESG risks that you're not aware of. And as you go into the value creation period, I do believe ESG is just an integral part of how to transform a company. And that is why you see my excitement for private markets. We're not a bank, we're a private markets manager. It's beautiful that we don't have to just be passive stewards of the assets. It's amazing to be the driving force for enhancement and transformation. But like it's not always going to be a sustainable transformation from A to Z. But I find it really hard to think of any company that would not have massive focuses that it can move. Now, interestingly, so I have the pleasure to talk to a number of CEOs and chairpersons of our companies. Last week, I pushed one of the leadership teams hard to be more ambitious in terms of carbon, and they pushed back. Why do you push back? And I said, listen, Andre, I know you're carbon-focused, environmental-focused, but first, we will focus on social. We have health and safety issues. We want to have less accidents in our factories. Number two, it's going to be about the environment. We want to have absolutely no waste issues, no oil spillage. That would be really bad. And then we're going to tackle climate change and then carbon reductions. So I find if you start to engage in a conversation, there's an immense interest to do the right thing. And it does require, however, a push to accelerate and tackle it tomorrow as opposed to the day after tomorrow.
But if I can build on what you said, if you allow, I actually think there's been a paradigm shift. I don't think we're in a world anymore where we're only looking at historical financials and projecting the values out. I think you're looking at value creation and how those companies are giving back, how they're treating their customers, otherwise you're not gonna have customer retention, how they're treating their people, how is their talent force, how is that measured, what intangibles have they been able to generate out of that in terms of innovation and value creation, and then what are they doing wider on society. I think the positive sense, especially when I listen to you, Andre, is that you're effectively confirming part of that journey is gone. We haven't gone as far as Andre Huffman would like us to go, and we need to go in terms of really measuring and being transparent around those value metrics, but we're moving in that direction, and I think that should give us quite a bit of enthusiasm and optimism.
And too much carbon, then I stop talking about carbon. It's a positive feedback loop. If you tackle carbon, you can tackle environment and nature and planet. So I see carbon as an entry point, and the positivity. I tell you, the positivity and the enthusiasm of this leadership team when they had identified ways to reduce by 20, 30, 40% over the next many years. It was just a good meeting. So it's an initial feedback loop.
Let me sort of build on that, because we've been focusing on the cost of environment. That's not true. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to do things very differently. Suddenly you can sort of, I believe passionately as business as a force for good, we're going to change the planet because we have this entrepreneurial spirit, which will allow us to take this new situation and to make the most out of it. Hence the importance of being able to measure the impact, because then you can really start managing it. And Andre, when you talk about a management team excited about reducing CO2, that's not obvious that you should be excited. If you look at it just as a cost, you go, well, but if you look at an opportunity for it to reinvent the business, and the business is going to be able to make a positive contribution, not only for shareholders also, but on a secondary line, but to make an impact to society, that's great news. And yes, reducing CO2 is an impact on social and human systems as well, but it's an ancillary consideration. It's what happens as a consequence. So for me, this notion of, when you ask, are companies going to survive? They're not going to survive if they bunker down and say, we don't want to change. But if they say the world has changed, there is an opportunity, we're going to grab it and we're going to walk with it, well, then, there is a future.
I completely agree. I think there's too much talk on the downside, on the regulation, on the carbon numbers, as opposed to the opportunity in the green revolution. Innovation will succeed here, and we will make a huge difference, I believe.
Now let's make a step into the world where companies are already active and then try to implement actions. Now the question is, you define an action, you implement, you execute, because you want to achieve a certain goal, a certain target. Now the question is, how can you actually measure the impact that you have with a specific activity. Maybe a question to you, Andre Hoffmann. How can you measure the impact?
Well, I'll give you an example. I'll give you the example of our company. 20, a bit less, 19 years ago, we started at board level a sustainability and governance committee. My cousin chaired it and I was part of it, and we started signifying to the organization, guys, our impact matters and we would like to know more about it. What can we do? And so the idea was not to say, with all respect to Ernst & Young, the idea was not to go and see some sort of consultant and say, look, this is the metric, now you imply this. The idea is to say, guys, you at the front, you're the one at the coalface. You are the one who are noticing the impact of our activities. How can we resurface that? You have to know that the board matters. Sorry, that of course the board matters, but the board minds, I mean, and so how can we create a reporting system which will allow us to go towards what we're trying to achieve? And so some amazing initiative came. Suddenly people looked at, for instance, at product stewardship. So how can we, within the different value chain mechanism, different supply chain mechanism, have an impact onto the size of the product, the way we can dispose of its component, the way we can reuse some of the component, recycle some. I mean, if it becomes something that's generated by the team, it has a much better chance of sticking. It's a bit, the political system of Switzerland. If it comes from bottom up, it tends to be more robust than if it's been imposed from the top down. And so, I mean, I can give you hundreds of different examples. For instance, we use genetically modified bacteria to produce some of our monoclonal antibodies. In order to make sure that we completely get rid of them, we burn at the end of the process. That's a huge CO2 expenditure. Now we filter rather than burn. It's a new filtering system which does not exist anywhere else. We've invented it in-house, but we reduced our CO2 output because of this. An example among many others. But what's important for me is this virtuous cycle. You need to have an impact coming from within the company.
Thank you, Andre. Now, when it comes to the environmental part and emissions, it may be easier to because you can easily measure emissions. What about the S in ESG, the social impact you can have? Absolutely crucial, of course. I mean, we employ 100,000 people on the planet. Our mission is not just to reduce CO2. Our mission is to do today what the patient needs tomorrow. We can only do that if we have a positive contribution in society as a whole. We want to be net contributors in the market in which we are active. So we don't define ourselves as a pill manufacturer. We define ourselves as a knowledge partner of the current healthcare systems. So most of our activities are targeted and looking at what we can contribute rather than saying how we can create an organization which satisfies itself. So decentralization, approach to the market from a different point of view are very important consideration. Of course, on the S, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if the question was on the S or on the G. It was on the S.
On the S, it's important that people who come to work with us do not come to work with us because they want a salary and a holiday. They come to us because they want to help us to do today what the patient needs tomorrow. And the fact that they can realize some of their personal ambitions within our network seems to me to be incredibly important. What's the point of recruiting people who are just serving time? You want people who actually are contributing to our mission. And by doing this sort of reflection, which is not only based on succeeding in our mission, but also being able to give people the opportunity to express themselves, you are contributing to a lot of the social issues that the world has around us.
Thank you. Maybe Andre, right to you. How do you support or can support your invested clients that approach you with questions around ESG? Is there any kind of list or support, standardized support that you can give them?
Well, actually, Ernst & Young can maybe contribute by helping our portfolio companies to professionalize. No, so let me give a very simple answer. First, it's about appointing people in the portfolio companies that are responsible for E and S and G. Second, it's about helping them on the journey, gathering the data in a proper way, which is not always easy, and professionalize over time. And the third one is really allowing them to focus. So I believe in I believe in focus. I've heard of a company that has to measure 100 ESG KPIs, and I believe that's probably the right thing to do, but maybe not really effective. So what we would like to incentivize our portfolio companies is to start with 5 or 10 or 15 KPIs and really figure out what it takes to improve in these dimensions. So I believe we can support our portfolio companies by allowing them to focus on just a few initiatives that really matter a lot for the beneficiaries. And like on the social side, the most simple question we can ask is ourselves. The most simple question is, will employees, after a holding period of 5 or 10 years, will they realize that Partners Group was a better steward or employer for the employees of our portfolio companies? And if you ask yourself this question, then it naturally implies maybe this should change, and this should change, and that should change. So sometimes it's about simply a change of perspectives, putting yourselves into the shoes of, for example, a portfolio company employee, and really inviting the leadership teams of these companies to trigger a change in that dimension. So not overmanage, but giving a bit of room and focus.
How important are ESG ratings for you? Because some of them, you might end up as a company even being ranked very high in such a rating, but let's say only considering 2 out of the 3 aspects of E, S, and G. So is that really helpful? Do you actually work with those rankings, or is it something that is not so at the core of your investment decisions?
No, I believe it's not. Maybe that will change over time. At this point, we don't work with ESG ratings. But we gather data, and we want to identify the most relevant KPIs that need to improve. So I'm probably more a person that wants to focus on initiatives, what will need to change, who will change it, as opposed to try and be perfect in 30 different dimensions.
Can I contribute something to that particular point? I mean, I think that when you talk about ESG metrics, this is the whole old way of thinking coming back again. This is the same thing as accounting. We're not accounting. We're talking about a different attitude. ESG is more of an attitude. It's more of a principle-based rather than a metric-based measurement. If you want to be efficient in terms of E, S, and G, it's not the fact that you are scoring. It's the fact that you behave differently. And this has to be the ultimate aim. So yes, I agree with André, taking the 10 first metric is easy, but what we really are wanting for, and that's the example I wanted to give before with the creation of the Sustainability Committee at Roche, we want to make sure that people who work within the company are understanding that this notion of limiting our impact on the environment is important in environment, in social, and in government.
Thank you. Now maybe let's talk a little about the risk that comes with climate change to us. And there are certain metrics around to start getting into managing those risks and putting even a cost mark to those risks. There's a standard which you all know, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD. Is that a good standard that you would recommend to more and more companies to apply to actually try to measure the risk that a company is exposed to? Maybe as a question to you, André Hoffmann.
Thank you very much for the question. TCFD was one of the partners with IFRS and a couple of other think bodies, and in fact the World Economic Forum, to create this body that we have now announced on the Tuesday of the first week of the Glasgow conference. We are establishing in Frankfurt something called the ISSB, the International Standard Sustainability Board, which will spend the next couple of years trying to and I hope we can do it faster, but to amalgamate all these different standards, including TCFD, and bring them together to a sort of metric that could be industry agnostic and usable by different companies to report on this level. So yes, I think TCFD was a good attempt, but the problem is that, and there I would really like to hear André's view on this. The problem is that we have so many different metrics to report this. We would like to see, but first of all, we have to make a distinction between reporting and management. If you report about what's happened after the event, it's important for people to be able to understand what the company has done. But what we really want within the businesses is the toolbox that allows us to take the decision at the time when you do make that decision. At the moment, if you build a new factory, you look at discounted cash flows, or if you look at residual values, but you don't really have an impact measurement that is sort of recognized by all. And this is where we need to go. We need to be to a place where we have the instruments needed for taking decisions. But in the meantime, creating transparency, creating reporting lines is, I think, absolutely crucial, because that will allow to compare company by company.
Hey, I'm a fan of TCFD. I'm so happy that one standard did win. I'm so happy that there's a winner, right? And now you know what to do. And quite honestly, it's a thoughtful, not too complex framework, and we apply it as a company, and we will ask our portfolio companies to also apply it. I think that's the way regulation should go. Really kind of overdo and then settle, or just consolidate and giving back time to companies to really focusing on improving these metrics. So I see it as a real positive. In terms of risk management, it's really tough. TCFD says you should do scenario analysis, you should measure more, and it's really difficult. My simple test, is really measure scope 1, 2, 3, add it all up, multiply it with a carbon price of $100 or $200, and then figure out how it affects your business and what you need to change in order to really stem the burden. Because like Frau von der Leyen said, nature is not willing to pay the price on carbon anymore. So there has to be a carbon price. And when there is a carbon price, which likely will happen sooner or later, that is a fact that companies need to address. So TCFD is a good framework, and it invites you to trigger action to get on the right track. And I look forward to TNFD, this Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosure, happening at one point in time. I believe, as excited as I am, that TCFD will remain the focus for quite some companies for a number of years before we move on, and I think it's okay.
But I fully agree. I'm sorry, Andre, did you want to go first?
No. I just wanted to put a plug for a company I happen to chair, the Capitals Coalition. The Capitals Coalition is a research institute in the UK, where we're trying to sort of work how we can measure the social capital, the human capital, the natural capital, and their interactions in order to influence the way we report the produced capital. But you obviously know that, so maybe I should shut up and listen to you.
No, absolutely not. No, that's really important. I just wanted to build on what you said, because I think the risk management aspect for financial institutions will get increasingly important. And there, I think it's going to be really important that from TCFD, we make sure that we establish a common framework for measuring risk that is simple, but allows also companies to understand how long they have to obtain external financing before that is cut. And I think that goes back to Benjamin's question on the need to transform. For those that aren't as quick on the take-up, that don't have Partners Group as a partner, excuse the pun, to get them there and help them, I think they need to realize there will be increasingly difficulties in obtaining financing because of the risk assessments that are happening at financial institutions.
Totally agree.
Would all of you agree that the introduction of an internal carbon price would be helpful to actually dealing with the costs of emissions and climate change?
Yeah, if I can start. It's a crude measure, but it's a good proxy. It will give us an idea of how robust the systems are. And in fact, the stress test that the central bank, Mark Carney at the time when he was governor of Bank of England, has imposed on other banks were very much based on this. What happens if one of the parameters suddenly blows out? And I think that's it would certainly help. Internally, we already use the price of carbon for planning our investments, although there is none.
I agree, Andre. I think internal price for carbon, it's already, I don't want to say leading practice, but it's leading practice for investment decisions within large companies to assess that. Funnily enough, it is between 100 and 150, depending where you are. Interesting that everybody seems to converge around that. And I do think it's a good guidance to get people to understand what the full impact is. So I think that's coming, and it's going to come not only on the internal fictitious one to allow for better investment decisions, it's coming in the external market as well. We can see this.
I believe the beauty of this is that it triggers initiatives. You put a price to it, and then you start thinking. If you don't put the price to it, then actually you don't launch an initiative. If you see like there's a tail risk and you quantify, then I believe businesses will launch strategic initiatives that have payback periods that are not like in the 4 to 6 years time horizon, but maybe 5 to 10 years. So it's a catalyst for additional initiatives to build better and more sustainable businesses. But it's not common practice in the private markets industry at this point in time, as far as I know.
Okay.
No.
So do you actually actively recommend to your portfolio companies to introduce such an internal carbon pricing?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Maybe soon.
Now let's look into, we discussed a lot about the challenges that we have, but there's one obvious solution that is just outside the door, which is the nature, which can also help us achieving some of the targets that we set ourselves. A question to you, André Hoffmann, how can nature actively help us to support us in our transformation journey and to become more sustainable?
So again, going back to Glasgow, this was very much the theme. One of the reasons why I decided to take the trip to Glasgow, which was a bad idea because I caught COVID there. One of the reasons why I decided to go is because I was scared that people would talk only about CO2, and that's not at all the case. I mean, everybody was talking about nature and about the impact and about how you cannot separate CO2 from the rest of the system. Now. The reason I'm saying that as a preamble is because the corollary of saying nature matters tends to guide us towards this whole concept which the IUCN has described as nature-based solution. And in particular, there's an initiative which was initiated by the initiative that was started by the World Economic Forum called 1 Trillion Trees, where the idea is to plant 1 trillion trees. Trees are these wonderful things. You plant them, they grow, they absorb carbon. And therefore, you can take out of some of the carbons from outside the atmosphere by planting lots of trees. There were 6 trillion trees on the planet when men arrived. There are only 3 left. So, if we replant another 3, we might get. It's a bit simplistic, of course. It's a bit simplistic to say that nature-based systems are just planting trees, restoring mangroves, restoring wetlands. Wetlands is an incredibly important contributor to natural systems. But for me, nature-based solution is a very simple question. It's for us, humanity, how do we get nature to work for us rather than trying actively to work against nature? The model of development we have used as humanity over the past 200 years, since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, has been one of violence. How can we take as much as possible? Because of course, the rate of conversion of nature into assets is something that is supposed to be positive. Well, it isn't really. So if you want to have nature working for humanity, we need to treat nature with a little more respect. So don't build, a vineyard next to a river that is going to flood and protect the vineyard with a wall, because at some stage the wall will break. You're better off to put the vineyard somewhere else where there is no flood. Just a simple example. So I don't remember what the question was, but I'm getting very excited about this idea that nature-based solution can be part of the equation, but not the only one, of course.
Where do you see the largest untapped opportunity that mankind has not really tapped into when it comes to activating nature and making nature work for us?
Well, it's a question of attitude. It's a question of humility towards our surroundings. Nature is not just there. So a famous economist, Pavan Sukhdev, always talks about we use nature because it's for free and we lose it because it has no price. And for me, this is an incredibly sort of telling sort of statement. When there will be no nature left, there will be very little chance of a humanity living in harmony with it. So we need to make sure that we continue to promote it wherever we can. And the stock of nature is a sort of backstop of everything we do. Whenever there is something that goes wrong, nature ends up by paying the price. So if you want to go in the long term, we need to regenerate some of this nature. And nature-based solution is very much about this. How do we give something back? I see Julie is agreeing, so I'll shut up because otherwise I can talk about this for hours.
Maybe, Julie, a question to you. And you work and see quite a lot of companies. What relevance do nature-based solutions have with the companies that you see in trying to making them achieve their net zero targets?
I actually think Andre said it well when he said that nature-based solutions will always play a role. I think we've got to be really careful on a couple of fronts. One, there is no, that role will never be as big as the need for us to reduce emissions and the impact that we have on the wider planet. I think that has to be number one. And then nature-based solutions can complement that, can support that, whether you're moving towards planting trees or doing other things. That has a small role to play, but can never overpower the rest. The second thing I would say is I do think, and I think this was the feeling also at Glasgow, that a lot of those solutions, if I call them that, around carbon credits, that needs to become a much more regulated market that's verified and not just greenwashed. And I think the danger on that piece is actually large. There's a lot of computations out there as to how many trees could possibly be planted in a certain number of time. And I think companies need to understand, and I know that Andre Fry would also support this, you can't buy your way out of the impact, right? You have to fix, we all have to fix the models so that the impact is lessened and then complement that lessened impact with positive contributions in nature-based solutions. But it's not a one or the other. So I do think they play a role. They need to be maybe not regulated, but there needs to be much more verification on authenticity and reality checks as to what's coming on. And there needs to be a realization that companies cannot buy themselves out of the transformation. They're going to have to find a way to adjust their models. And by the way, I think that's a huge opportunity. I come back to the beginning statements. I think there's way too much talk around the downside and not enough talk about the upside on this. And that's where I think, yeah, I would leave it with that. Otherwise, I'll get, like Andre, very excited about it. So.
Let me hijack this topic quickly. I believe what is fascinating about climate change or planet or people focus is that it requires an immense collaboration across people, nations, companies, and that is the beautiful aspect of it, right? It will require fundamental research, it will require concessionary capital, it will require risk capital to develop technologies, it will require private markets companies that really build platforms to magnify the impact, but it's going to be a really, really big collaboration that's needed to trigger all this change. Also for nature-based solution, nature-based solutions. So Andre, the 1 trillion trees initiative that you mentioned, you know, there's a spin-off from ETH that I try to support too. There was a 1 trillion tree initiative or paper. By now there's a spin-off, there's an open data platform that really wants to enable effective and responsible restoration. It wants to catalyze funding for the promising projects. That really is about inspiring a movement. So the fascinating and really urgent topic is that, again, and I know I've used the word 2 times, now it's the 3rd time, it shouldn't happen in isolation, but it's about people and companies starting to collaborate. Because it's, business is competitive, and when it comes to sustainability, it requires a new mindset where people start to collaborate. And for Restore, as an example, many parties have started to collaborate. It required capital, it required technology, it required science, and if all these pieces fall together, then I believe the nature-based solutions or any initiative that's needed for the decades to come is much more likely to realize its potential.
Yeah, the initiative at Zurich University is very exciting. Mark Benioff and I went to visit as a delegation of the World Economic Forum and work together. And I think that's a collaboration together moving forward. But if I can make a little plug, there is one solution, nature-based solution, which we can use not in CO2 emission, but in water management. And, I think that has to do with wetlands. I chair a foundation since 60 years in the Mediterranean is trying to restore wetlands and to promote their wise use. And, replacing a wetland by a retreatment plant, which is artificial and costs an enormous amount of money to build and then to maintain, and is less efficient than a reed bed. That sort of thinking we need to address, and it's an opportunity again.
Terrific.
Thank you. In terms of timing, I would now also use a couple of minutes to grab a little onto your personal experiences on this transformation pathway, because all the 3 you are enrolled that have the potential to influence people, to guide a little the way how your companies are making the next steps on this transformation and pathway onto to becoming a more sustainable company. What were the main challenges that you were facing within your companies, and how did you overcome those challenges? Leave it open. Who wants to start with? Maybe Julie?
It's a great question, and if I look at my own firm with EY, what we did to embark on this journey was to start from the strategy, frankly. I think most things start from the top. We redesigned in a bottoms-up process, to comment on both of you, a bottoms-up process, we redesigned our strategy for the next years until 2030. We called it Next Wave, and we focused it around those value-driven metrics. So we defined how we're going to look at success in terms of our customers, in terms of our people, and in terms of the impact that we have on society. So that was the first thing, to have every partner understand we don't just measure success in terms of growth or net income or amounts distributed. We look at success in terms of how we're giving back to the people, how we're treating our customers, and the impact that we have on society. And we define that impact in terms of lives impacted. Our goal is to impact 1 billion lives by 2030. We're well on our way. There's a lot more to do. It requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of new business models, and requires us to move away from an annual assessment of our growth to a much more longer-term horizon, acknowledging you've got to get a little bit further. That's been a really positive move. That was the first step. The second step was to take a look at what we were doing on the S in the wider sense of carbon emissions. We've set ourselves a journey to becoming carbon negative. It's going to take us a while to do that. And since our impact on nature is largely connected with the 312,000 people we have and their travel to customers, we have said we will embark on a journey to take us by 2025 to reduce our emissions by 40%. That's a big step for us because it means getting everybody, all of our talents on board towards that target. And we will complement that with a couple of nature-based investments that we're looking at that will help. But our major focus is how do we reduce our own emissions? And obviously, EY is not in a position to say, thank you very much, we're not serving any of our clients anymore, or we're only going to serve our clients virtually. We've got to find a way to do this. Now, I think innovation and technology will help. I think behavior and change management is going to be necessary. And I feel like we're on that journey, but there's a lot more to go. And so getting our partners to understand success also has long-term metrics. Success has to be defined in value creation, and success will require change management along the way. To get everybody on this journey was really important for our 312,000 people.
André Frey, what about you and Partners Group?
Well, for us, I believe it's just about dialogue and discovery. While it starts from the top, I do believe for our company it was really important that we involve all the stakeholders. There was no, I didn't have to convince, or I don't have to convince about the importance of sustainability, but I believe it really helps to talk to many different stakeholders and opinionated people to learn, okay, what is the trouble they see, how would they solve it? So for me, the biggest lesson learned is that you don't do it as a small team, but you gather as many people as you can. You develop a minimum level of consensus, understanding, and off you go. So I believe it can be baby steps. It can be baby steps, like what was concluded at COP26. Okay, let's get started. Thank you for your commitment. Come back next year, and maybe that is the way we're going to tackle it as a company. So it's about building consensus, trying, return, convene again, figure out what has worked, what not, and make the second attempt.
André Hoffmann?
Well, I'd like to sort of endorse what the two previous speakers have said, and Julie and André. It strikes me that we start this conversation by talking about CO2 emission, and now we're talking about the impact we as a company can have on society. We cannot sort of limit this to a couple of metrics. It's really a different attitude. I'll give you an example. We've reorganized our sales team in a way within the company where we don't fix targets anymore. You don't have to make a certain number in order to promote it. What we want to measure is the outcome you're having on the disease progression in the region that you serve. We've replaced our 5-year plans by 10-year aspirations. One of these aspirations is to deliver twice as much medical benefit to society at half the environmental cost. I mean, these are, these are things. When I went to business school, I would say, oh, this is bully. We need to have the exact number. We need to be exactly what we need to do. And that's not the way you deal with this sort of consideration. It's all far too soft to be able to really correspond to a rigid framework. So for our company to be able to really have a positive impact on, if you distill it down on climate, it means changing the way we interface with humanity. It means becoming a different company. And humanity will have to do the same thing. We've built the last 150 years of industrial revolution on violence. We've taken what there was. And now we need to give back. We need to rebuild this. And we need to use humility. We need to use capacity at understanding what the needs are, asking the real questions, and I hope getting to the real solutions. Because it's not going to work in a finite system if we continue exploiting. Violence is a thing of the past. Now it's the age of collaboration. Now, I know that reality doesn't tell us that. And my God, the fact that the pandemic has meant that the borders are going up again. But we need to sort of understand that in a finite environment, we will not go much further if we don't work together. So collaboration, and in particular, public-private partnership. Since the beginning of the pandemic, more than $14 billion trillion dollars have been promised by countries all over the planet to restart the economy. Well, sorry, these are new, the future cannot happen without public money now. So we need to partner. We need, it took us 50 years to get the governments out of the industry last time around. This time, it's going to be much more complicated. So let's roll up our sleeves and get on with it.
Well said, well said.
That could almost be a closing remark, but we're not there yet. I think we still want to give our participants online the chance that we address some of the questions that they raised now to the panelists here. Now, the first question that I read here, and I will read it out loud for all of you, it goes to all. Many businesses seem to align now, but how do we as individuals change our behavior? Do we need not only our present tax sheet to fill out, but also our environmental footprint sheet? You're laughing, so I'm pointing to you, André Frey, directly.
This is such a great question. I have no idea how to answer. I don't fill in sheets, but I guess, like all of us, we're surrounded by people, and if we invite them to give us feedback, they will let us know where we can improve, right? So I will not fill in a sheet, but kind of like if all of us know kind of like where we could do better. Is it the car, or is it the food, or is it the way we interact with people? Yeah, great question. I can't answer. I'm sorry.
So perhaps I can give it a try with my background in NGOs. As I said, I used to be the vice president of WWF International, and this is a question we get asked regularly. Why? How can we make an impact at personal level? When we talk about corporations, we've had a very interesting panel just now on that theme. That's a different set of data. Now, the WWF standard answer is the best way to influence your consumption pattern is to change the way you nourish yourself. It's to make sure that you go towards simpler and affordable food, and that you decrease the amount of red meat in your food intake. But again, it's about restriction. It's not about opportunity. So if I really want to change my behavior, if I really want to contribute to a way of making a difference to society, I'm looking for the opportunities where I can use the common sense we were just talking about, where I can use the humility we were just talking about, to make sure that I make a contribution one little step at a time. The image that comes to mind is the dam in the mountain. A drop, and then one day the wall breaks and the water goes into the valley. And we're getting to that point, as Julie was saying before. There is a paradigm shift, and collectively we can.
I agree, André, completely with both of what you said. I do think as we look forward, and I'm not going to say this is the next 2 years or the next 3, but I do think we as companies, and I'll take myself, we need to provide better information to allow for better decisions. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we at EY are exploring is, for every engagement letter I write, for every offer I send, should I include next to it a carbon calculator that says what the emissions are so that people can make better choices? When my partners book flights and they look today at the 7 o'clock, the 9 o'clock, the 11 o'clock flight, maybe they should also know which airline is using biofuels. And so they should have the carbon cost next to it. Not to be like a tax return, but to allow for better choices. I think we're going to have to allow people to make better choices. And that's going to require more or different information. Today, if you think about the products that we consume, we know today the calorie intake of most products. I make a choice whether I drink a Coca-Cola versus a water versus an orange juice, not always on the calorie count, but also on the calorie count. I think carbon will need to move in this direction. And not just carbon, to Andre's point, maybe it's the environmental impact, if we can think of that. At the end of the day, as Andre said, each person needs to make a positive contribution. And to do that, we need to provide them with the information and tools to be able to do that.
But I do like very much the idea of an environmental calorie. Every
Yes.
package, everything we do should have a cost to the environment.
Otherwise, how can we expect people to make conscious and purposeful decisions? You can't compare, and there are differences, Andre. There really are differences. We'll get there.
There's another question that we see. It's directed towards Julie and André Frey. I read it. What do regulators, standardization bodies, or the financial industry need to do in order to achieve credibility with sustainable investments and financing?
And I believe there was a related question also about the sustainable development goals and like, is there scarcity of investment opportunities? I believe that regulators and the bodies mentioned are on a good track. So I'm a liberal person. I don't like regulation, and I like regulation, and regulation must come. I welcome that TCFD is the framework that made it. I welcome SFDR because it now starts to have sustainability in a more quantitative and a more transparent way. All of this is needed, and the financial industry will need to increase transparency, will need to report more, and I believe it will allow investors to assess which products are more sustainable and which ones are less sustainable. So I believe we go into the right direction. The discussion that happens now about greenwashing risk is a really interesting one. We all need to watch what words we use. I have looked at the material by Partners Group. Partners Group has not claimed to be an impact investor, and we are not. But our purpose is to create lasting positive impact. So I had to balance, like, okay, how do regulators, for example, look at our claim that as Partners Group we want to have a positive, lasting impact? And I stand by, we do have, by enhancing, by reducing external negative externalities, by transforming businesses. So we do create lasting positive impact. But the industry is now invited and forced to quickly clarify how we describe the impact that we have and how sustainable we are. So I think that's a really, really good debate. In terms of investment opportunities, maybe one final comment. Our private markets industry is about $10 trillion or approaches $10 trillion. The figures I've seen, for example, now in relation to decarbonization, talk about 20 trillion over the decade to come and about 30 trillion in the decade from 31 to 40. So I believe there's going to be massive opportunities for everyone who has a technology or a platform business skill set. So I don't believe there's going to be scarcity of investment opportunities to build real additionality. But if everyone just wants to buy a clean, already sustainable business, then there's going to be a shortage of investment opportunities.
Great comments.
Another question that goes to all, what would you see as most relevant principles to apply in an organization to effectively build up strategic sustainability capacities and to achieve credible outcome? What are the most relevant principles to apply in an organization?
As I was trying to say once or twice during the last 12, I believe very much in principle basis rather than in rule-based sort of way of doing organization. So if you really want people to realize what it means to be sustainable and how thinking sustainably is something that influences the totality of the operation in which you are and the totality of the endeavor that you're entering into, you need to clearly define what the outcome is that you want. Being sustainable is a frame of mind. It's not just a recipe. It's not based on, adding 100 calories this side and 20 calories the other. It's a question of making sure that you treat people around you, people and natural system with respect. And for me, that the original work is about this. It's about defining what sort of impact you want to have before entering into a too complex metric.
Okay. Maybe the last question to take, what advice would you give to companies waiting for governments or regulators before taking sustainability measures?
I would jump in here and say, don't wait. I don't think we can afford, and I don't think they can afford to have the regulation nailed down. That doesn't mean that they need to make all of their moves, Benjamin, now. But if they don't have a plan with the desired outcome and where they're going from their strategy, their product portfolio, their support functions, they're never going to make any competitive advantage out of this at all. And so my advice would be, there's no time like the present if they haven't done it already.
First mover advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, Andre, I think all of us need to speak much more about the positive upside about this, the business opportunity. This is a huge green revolution, and we should be talking about it that way, because I think until now, all of the discussions, also around COP and in the run-up to COP, they've been all fear-driven, and I think you said that. Fear motivates people, but it generally motivates not necessarily towards positive action. Now we need to entice positive action, and that requires positive outcomes. You need a positive reinforcement cycle. The benefits that we can achieve now, the competitive advantage, the transform to win, that's where we've got to paint the green revolution and doing the right thing. It's not only good for the company, it's not only good for the people, it's not only good for the planet, it's good for all of us. It's a win-win-win. And I think we can get there.
Well, Andre, in your industry, Ronald Cohen has been very vocal in supporting the idea that if you manage for impact, you are going to be much more successful. He's even called ESG as the new tech.
There you go. Yep. There you go.
Maybe too, because we have to come to an end, unfortunately. Maybe in a couple of sentences from all of you, what do you wish for the future? Andre Hoffmann, you go first.
Of course, first thing, I wish there is a future. And there is no future if there is no sustainability. I mean, we can talk about details of this until the cow come home. But the reality that we are in a very, very serious crisis. This is not something that's going to disappear. We need to seriously take coordinated actions if we want to make sure that we will look after the 10 billion people we are going to be on the planet within 20 years. And this is not just science fiction or it's reality. It's hitting us in the face at the moment. And so we need to do something. And as Julie said very rightly, we don't do that as a sense of panic or a sense of fear, but as a sense of reasonable people together to move forward into a nice future. And if we don't do something, then we're in trouble. So if you ask me, what do I wish for the future? I wish one.
Very good.
Hey, as a human being, I wish that my kids and their kids and their kids' will have a great life that's worth living on a great planet that's healthy. Because sustainability is about the next generation, isn't it? So I don't have a smarter definition, but I do hope that that my kids and their kids will have a happy and healthy life on a happy and healthy planet.
I think that's terrific. And then it's hard for me to top both of you two. It must have to do with the name Andre here. But I will say this, and I come back to that. At EY, we have an expression around the ripples. Everyone can create a ripple effect that influences others. I wish that people would stop saying, I love change, but I love it when somebody else does it. Everyone needs to be part of this movement. And no matter how small they think the action is, it will have a ripple effect if we do this together. And that's the choice of what you eat, of how you travel, of what you consume, the choice of how you set your strategy. and where you're going to go, whether you're going to go for a short-term or more sustainable view on a company, this has a huge ripple impact. If we understand what that ripple impact is, we all can make a tremendous difference.
Thanks a lot for those insights. I think I could have gone on for another hour or maybe even more having that discussion with all of you here. I think the goal of today was to inspire people, and I think at least it was extremely inspiring for me. I hope also for everyone out there watching us online. I want to thank you for watching us, for following our conversation. I think now the topic is extremely relevant. It's on all of us now to execute, to change, and I think it's better to change now than being changed. And with that, I think stay healthy, stay tuned, and goodbye from Lucerne in Switzerland. Thanks a lot.